Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another daily dose of Streets of New Capenna spoilers, and oh my goodness, we have some amazing stuff to talk about today. A really sweet mythic angel, some really cool commanders, some really just powerful, interesting stuff, which means we should probably jump right into it, start talking sweet new cards. Before we do, two quick reminders. Number one, if you want to keep up on all the latest spoilers throughout the day, you'll find them all over at MTGpreviews.com. Number two, if you need some Streets of New Capenna cards, you can get them from our awesome sponsor, Card Kingdom, by heading over to cardkingdom.com/MTGGoldfish, and if you get a free goldfish sticker, just let them know you want one in your order notes, and they will hook you up. Anyway, let's talk Streets of New Capenna. First up today, we got a pretty sweet black mythic nightmare angel, an Angel of Anguish. So 5 mana, 5/3 with flying, and it said if you would be dealt damage, prevent that damage and mill twice that many cards. So if you take 1 damage, you mill 2, you take 10 damage, you mill 20. This card is really sweet. If you build around it and can keep it on the battlefield, it can be a combo piece that can keep you alive forever, and even played fairly. Like in Standard, it can be really solid in a graveyard deck, assuming you can get it to stick. But let's say you're playing, I don't know, Reanimator or Old Stick Fingers, or you got Skyclave Shades, or flashback spells like Ghoul Caller's Harvest, or maybe Disturb cards that you want to cast from your graveyard. Getting milled can be a massive upside. Not only is Angel of Anguish keeping you alive by preventing damage, it's filling your graveyard, which in a graveyard deck is what you want anyway, so you kind of get the double upside there. And then, if you're playing a modern deck or a commander deck, I couldn't find a way to do this in Standard, but there are cards that just shuffle your graveyard back into your library whenever they're milled. Something like Big Eldrazi, like Emrakul, Gaia's Blessing, a much more budget-friendly way to do it. If you can stick an Angel of Anguish and protect it, and you just have one of these cards in your deck, you can essentially never die to damage. Your opponent's going to mill everything, they'll hit the Emrakul or the Gaia's Blessing, your library shuffles back in, do it again, do it again, do it again. You can never die to damage as long as you keep this around. And then, if you want to build further around it, you can try to use getting cards out of your library to your advantage. Stuff like Thassa's Oracle, Laboratory Maniac, Jace Wielder of Mysteries. These are all cards that reward you for running out of cards in your library. So you can take damage with the Angel of Anguish out, mill your entire library, then win with one of these cards. Also pretty cute with Sir Conrad. Sir Conrad wants cards going into your graveyard to deal damage to your opponents. Angel of Anguish really punishes your opponent for hitting you if you got a Sir Conrad out. Also kinda cute with Command the Dreadhorde. The only thing with Command the Dreadhorde, it doesn't work as well as you want it to. If you have Angel of Anguish in your graveyard, and you try to reanimate with Command the Dreadhorde, you're going to take the damage before the Angel of Anguish is on the battlefield, so you're probably going to die. On the other hand, if you already have Angel of Anguish on the battlefield, you can cast Command the Dreadhorde, reanimate everything, mill a bunch of cards, which you probably want anyway, so kind of a neat synergy maybe for a commander deck there. The only problem with Angel of Anguish is it is really fragile. 3 toughness, kind of a big deal, and I think this is going to be the big problem in Standard. Sure, stuff like Vanishing Verse, Inferno Grass, Farewell, Bloodchief's Thirst, they're going to kill everything. Brutal Cathar. So it really isn't a downside to have 3 toughness. Where you really see the impact of 3 toughness is with red removal, like Abrades or Dragonfires. Those are cards that if you had 4 toughness, you're going to save your Angel. It's not going to die to those spells, but because it has 3 toughness, it does die to the red removal as well, which means it's going to be pretty tricky to get this to stick on the battlefield unless you're actively building around it. Maybe in Standard you're playing Snakeskin Veils. Maybe in Modern you're playing a Totem Umbra, like Hyena Umbra. In Commander, stick a Swiftfoot Boots on it, stick a Darksteel Plate on it. That's a lot of protection as it is, and if you have an Eldrazi in your deck or something, this could keep you alive for a really long time. So I think that Angel of Anguish, it is potentially really powerful. Just be warned, it is fragile. So if you're planning to really build around it, and you're trying to do the Live Forever with Eldrazi plan, or Gaia's Blessing plan, or whatever, make sure you have ways to keep it on the battlefield, because almost every single deck that you play against, in Standard and in older formats, is gonna have ways to kill a 5/3. Same with Commander as well. So do the work to build around it if you're gonna combo with it. Otherwise, in a graveyard deck, it's fine to just play fairly as a temporary effect where you mill some cards and fill your graveyard and save a bit of damage, knowing that it's not going to live forever, but it doesn't have to live forever to do its job. We also got an interesting new vehicle in Funds Transport. So Funds Transport, 4 mana, 5/5 with Trample. It says when it deals combat damage to a player, create a treasure token for each artifact that player controls. So this is kind of dockside extortionist on a vehicle, but very much at home Actually, it's probably Zorn's vehicle, come to think of it. Zorn, perfect for driving. This gives you another treasure, which is kind of cute. So is funds transport actually good? Normally, and we've talked about this with vehicles many times in the past, the constructed playable vehicles almost always have flying. Like, that is really the one thing that the good vehicles all have in common. Whether or not trample is enough to make up for not having flying, I'm kind of guessing no. Like, in standard, the ground just gets so gummed up. It's really easy by the time that this comes down at turn 4 and maybe is attacking on turn 5. Their opponent's going to already have, like, Azeka's Charioted or a huge board of white creatures or whatever. There's a lot of ways that this can be blocked, even with trample. So that is kind of a vote against it. Although, in the right matchup, it can make a lot of treasure tokens. We do have a couple of decks in standard that are kind of built around artifacts. The biggest being the Oni Call Anvil decks that are making blood tokens. They're sacking blood tokens, they're making artifact construct tokens with Oni Called Anvil, and they often have a lot of useless artifacts on the battlefield, and they don't have a ton of good blockers. They got a lot of small blockers, but you might actually be able to trample in with funds transport and make like 5 mana, 10 mana, which would be absurd. Like, if you can get in hits with this in the right matchup, it is really ridiculous amount of mana it can generate. Also good against other treasure token decks. Yes, your opponent, if they're playing their Prosperous Innkeepers or Gold Spans, they can just take and sack all their treasures to fizzle you getting treasures, but that's still kind of a win. Like, you're either making mana, which is great, or you're taking away your opponent's mana, which is maybe not as good as making mana, but it's pretty close. So you kind of win either way. In Commander, I think, is where this card is especially exciting. If you look at Commander decks, they pretty much all have a bunch of mana rocks, Soul Rings and Signets and Mind Stones. So Funds Transport is going to have artifacts on the battlefield against most opponents, and even if you're making 2 treasures, 3 treasures, that's fine. If you're getting in the nut draw and hitting for 10 treasures or something, then this card is absolutely busted. Then you start to feel a little bit of the Dockside Extortionist feel. Speaking of Dockside Extortionist, not only can you kind of compare this to a really watered down vehicle version of Dockside Extortionist, I mean, compared to Dockside is just so busted. You gotta hit your opponent with it. It only targets one player rather than the rest of the table, so it's way, way worse than Dockside, but it is pretty cute against Dockside. Your opponent plays Dockside and makes like 10 treasures. If you had Fund Transport, you could attack them, potentially either hit them and you get 10 treasures, so you get the same advantage of Dockside, or make your opponent stack all their treasures at instant speed when they probably can't use them. So it does seem like a kind of interesting way to hose the treasure decks that have become really, really popular in Commander because Dockside is so busted. So Fund Transport, the card's cool. The ceiling is super duper high. Like, when it goes well, this card is absurd. So powerful. Gonna make so much mana. Probably gonna win you the game. On the other hand, it doesn't have flying. It is 4 mana. Like, that's Azeka's Chariot range. Is this Azeka's Chariot? I don't really think so. It doesn't crew itself with tokens like Chariot does. So I think it's sweet. I'm excited to play it in treasure decks or against treasure decks, especially in Commander. But in Standard, I'm guessing this is one of those kind of fringy, not super duper strong vehicles. We also got a pretty sweet human 3-drop, an Expert Rescuer. So Expert Rescuer, 3 mana, 3/2 human rogue with lifelink. And when it enters the battlefield, you can return target creature card with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield as long as you control Expert Rogue. That creature can't attack or block. So this is Lures at home, I guess. Kind of a one-shot Lures. Even the stats are kind of the same. Yes, Lures can hit any permanent and you do it every turn, and it starts in your hand, and it's really busted, and it's banned in pretty much every format. But Expert Rescuer is kind of like a one-shot creature-only version of Lures, which I think can still be a pretty powerful effect. Think about Standard. Of course you have this downside, that if you Expert Rescuer, and it stays on the battlefield, you can't really use the creature it reanimates as a creature, but there's a lot of popular creatures in Standard where that doesn't really matter. Like, Prosperous Innkeeper, it's not really about attacking and blocking, it's about making treasures. Luminarch Aspirant is about putting counters on things. Intrepid Adversary is about pumping your team, or Tangled Forehead for ramp, or Outland Liberator for blowing stuff up, Eyetwitch Shambling Yes for sacrifice. So even though that reads like a pretty big downside, in a lot of the decks that would want this, I don't think that's actually that big of a downside. Plus, eventually your Expert Rescuer is going to die, and then your creature becomes a real creature again that can do everything. Also pretty cute with, like, artifact equipment creatures, like Lion Sash. Sure, Maybe it can't attack or block, but that doesn't mean you can't reconfigure it and still use it that way. Also cute with all the casualty cards, just getting back something that you're planning on sacrificing anyway, kind of free value with your Ob Nixilis or whatever. And it works really, really well with blink effects. In Standard, we got Teleportation Circle. Older formats, Ephemera and Soul Herder, Teferi can pick it up and let you recast it. The trick here is kind of twofold. First, if you Ephemera it, let's say, or Teleportation Circle your Expert Rescuer, you get its trigger again, so you get to reanimate something else. More importantly, I believe, if I'm understanding how this wording works, it should make your Expert Rescuer a new version of Expert Rescuer, which would mean your first reanimation target becomes a real creature again that can attack or block, because the game is going to recognize the blinked Expert Rescuer is a new version of itself, and that restriction would no longer apply. So, I don't know, if the wording is weird and it doesn't work that way, let me know in the comments, but I'm like 99% sure that is how it should work. So really good with blink effects. The question I have for this card in Standard is, where does it fit? Like, if you look at the 10 most played cards, creature cards in Standard right now, it is essentially a list of white 3-drops. There are actually 7 white 3-drops on that list. Skyclave, Brutal Cathar, Archon of Amira, Guardian of Faith, Adeline, Radiant. That's so many cards competing for this exact same slot in Standard. Where does Expert Rescuer fit? I think it's like on the power level of some of these cards. I think it is good enough to see play alongside these cards, but what are you cutting? How many 3-drops can you possibly play in the same white X deck in Standard? I don't know the answer to that. So even though the card's really good, we just have a plethora of good white 3-drops right now. One thing I like about it is in best of 3, we see Guardian of Faith be kind of a hoser for control, but you can't really play in the main deck because it's not good enough if you're not playing against control. So it's a sideboard card. Expert Rescuer can kind of be a very watered down version of that I think is main deckable. You can wait until your opponent rasts the board and then you get your stuff back. The only downside is it is pretty weak to Farewell since it exiles everything, but against other Wraths, other removal, this can kind of be a main deck version. Not exactly the same, but another way you can grind against a control deck with your aggro deck. In older formats, this is pretty much Renegade Rallier. Renegade Rallier, you gotta trigger Revolt, and it reanimates any permanent with mana value 2 or less, so it does have some upsides. Expert Rescuer, though, you don't need to care about Revolt, and it's only in one color, and it has lifelink. Renegade Rallier definitely does have some uses. One potential use for Expert Rescuer in older formats is to add redundancy to the Safi Eriksdatter combo decks. If you've never seen Safi Eriksdatter combo, the idea is like Safi Eriksdatter, you can sack it to make it so when a creature would go to your graveyard or return to play, and then Expert Rescuer, of course, can reanimate Safi Eriksdatter. So the idea is you have a sacrifice outlet, maybe a Viscera, maybe you also have a Blood Artist as a finisher, and you can like cast Expert Rescuer to get back your Safi, then you sack Safi, targeting your Expert Rescuer. So next time it dies, it's going to come back into play. Then you can sack your Expert Rescuer to Viscera, it goes to the graveyard, comes back into play thanks to Safi's ability, and then you're also going to get back the Safi with the Expert Rescuer's ability, so you can do it again. So you get infinite ETB triggers, infinite death triggers, combo it off and win the game. So you could already do this with Renegade Rallier and a few other things, but it is nice that this adds some more redundancy to the combo. It's cheap, it's efficient, works with Collected Company or whatever, so that's worth keeping in mind in older formats. The other place this is probably relevant is in Humans. So Modern has for a long time had a 5-color Humans deck. Not sure Expert Rescuer will make it there, but thanks to getting another 5-color tribal land in Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, we now have 5-color Humans in Pioneer and Historic, and I think that that is probably the home for Expert Rescuer. Getting back Athalia's Lieutenant for more pumping, a Champion of the Parachute, Kai'Sail Freebooter, Athalia seems really, really powerful. So Expert Rescuer, I think this card is very strong. I think this is Standard playable strong, maybe Pioneer Historic playable strong, maybe Modern playable strong in the right deck in one of those combo decks. At the same time in Standard, we have so many good white 3-drops. I don't know what to make of it. I don't know where it fits in that hierarchy of so many busted 3-drops at the top of the format, so we're gonna have to wait and see, but this is definitely one to keep in mind for Constructed, because I think this card's pretty good. Next up, we got a new 15-drop in Shadow of Mortality. So Shadow of Mortality, 15 mana, black card, 7/7 Avatar, and it says if your life total is less than your starting life total, this spell costs X less to cast, where X is the difference. So this calls back to Death Shadow in specific. Like, even the name kind of calls back to that, but this is no Death Shadow. The power of Death Shadow is you can get down to like 12 life and cast it as a 1/1 and grow it throughout the game. Shadow of Mortality, you got to get down to 7 life to cast it for 2 mana. If you're at 10 life, it's going to be 5 mana. If you're at 15 life, I don't even want to count that high. It's going to be way more mana than you have in your deck. So it's just not as efficient or easy to use as Death Shadow. Even in Standard, I just don't know if it's going to be worth it. We've seen Scourge of the Skyclaves, kind of like a pseudo Death Shadow, just kind of fall flat because it also cares about your opponent's life total, and that's much harder to control than your own life total. So I think that Shadow Immortality, even though it does have the upside that it doesn't care about your opponent's life total, is just going to be too clunky. The problem with cards like this is when they don't work, they're just literal dead draws. Like when they work, they're kind of sweet. You get down to 7 life real quick, you get a 7/7 for 2, you're like, yeah, got him. On the other hand, when it doesn't work, you have this 15 drop in your hand that you can't even cast. And we've seen in Magic's past some of these expensive cost reduction cards be quite good, like Mirror Enforcer, Galta Primal Hunger, based on how easy it is to achieve their goal and reduce their cost. Like it's really easy to flood the board with artifacts or play high powered creatures for Galta. On the other hand, we've seen a lot of these cards be really bad. Ghoul Tree's a card that when it was spoiled, 8 mana 10/10 costs 1 less for each creature card in your graveyard. I love this card. I thought that card was going to be so sweet. I was so hyped about it, and it did literally nothing in Standard. And that was 10 years ago Standard. That wasn't as powerful as today. Same with like Avatar of Hope, Thrasta. So we've seen many of these cards that are too expensive to cast fairly, but get a cost reduction, just really end up doing nothing. I think that Shadow Immortality is going to fall into the later camp, where it's just a little too clunky, a little too hard to use. I've seen some people saying, oh, play it in Death Shadow in Modern. No, don't play it in Death Shadow in Modern. I mean, maybe people tried in Death Shadow in Modern, but I think it's just going to be too clunky to use. When you think about Death Shadow, they're a really low land count deck, and they need to be able to function with like 3 lands maybe. That means you're going to have to get down to like 7 or 8 life to be able to cast your Shadow Immortality, which is kind of tough. That's a pretty low life total. As I mentioned before, Death Shadow, the power is you get down to 12 and cast it as a 1/1, or get down to 11 and cast it as a 2/2, and then grow it throughout the game. Shadow Immortality can't do that. You got to get down to 7 or less life to really be able to get on the battlefield, maybe 8 life to get on the battlefield, and you can't really do anything with it before that. So I think it's just going to be a little too clunky, a little too slow. On the other hand, I think this card is a new Modern staple and going to see play across formats for one reason, which is it's 15 mana, and there's some decks that all they care about is those numbers, the mana value up in the top corner of the card. That is all that really matters. The best example of this is Calibrated Blast. We played Calibrated Blast on Budget Magic a while ago. It is like the memeiest, funniest deck, but when it works, it's actually kind of hilarious, and all that deck cares about is how high the mana value of the cards is, because you want to reveal high mana value stuff to deal a ton of damage. This is 15 mana value. That is as high as it gets. Emrakul is like the king of Calibrated Blast decks. Just because it's 15 mana, there's not other 15 drops available. This is going to be like a $1 version of Emrakul, so it's going to be great for our budget Calibrated Blast deck. We played Hidasugu combo in Standard. The most expensive card we could find to really use with it was Explosive Singularity. This is way better than that. Hidasugu revealing this as 15 damage, Yoriko in Commander. So I think that's the role of this card. I don't think playing it fairly is going to work. I think it's going to be too clunky, and even if you make it work, it's only a vanilla 7/7, which isn't that exciting. It's never going to be a 12/12 or whatever like Death Shadow. On the other hand, if your deck cares exclusively about mana values and high mana values, this is one of the best cards that has ever been printed in Magic's history. We also got Cabaretti Ascendancy, our new Naya Ascendancy. So a 3-mana Naya enchantment says at the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top card of your library. If it's a creature or planeswalker, you may reveal it and put it in your hand. If you don't, you may put it on the bottom of your library. So Cabaretti Ascendancy, it can be a pretty interesting source of card advantage. If you think about a Magic deck in basically any format, it's probably going to be, if you really focus on creatures and planeswalkers, about half creatures and planeswalkers, and then the rest of it's going to be lands, the Cabaretti Ascendancies itself, maybe a couple utility spells. So this is essentially going to be Phyrexian Arena that doesn't cost you life half the time, and the other half of the time it's going to be a Thassa God of the Sea. I don't think that a 3-mana enchantment that scries 1 each turn, I don't think that's going to be good enough to see play. On the other end, we know from a Phyrexian Arena that a 3-mana enchantment that draws you a card each turn is very, very good. That still sees a ton of play in Commander. It occasionally shows up in very fringy decks and constructed formats. Not so much anymore, but it did in the not super distant past. So Cabaretti Ascendancy is drawing a card half the time. Half of a Phyrexian Arena. Is that going to be enough to make this worth it? And I think the answer is maybe. Like, look at Standard. We already have a Naya deck in Standard that is roughly 50 50% creatures and planeswalkers. And one of the upsides in Standard is you can get all your removal effects from creatures and planeswalkers, things like Brutal Cathar, Skyclave, Wandering Emperor. So you can have a ton of removal while still being almost exclusively creatures and planeswalkers. So you can definitely have a deck in Standard that is like 30 creatures and planeswalkers with plenty of removal, 4 Cabaretti Ascendancies, and then, I don't know, 2 other spells or something in lands. And you're going to draw a card 50% of the time with this, scry the other 50% of the time. Is that good enough to see play? I'm honestly not sure, because we got stuff like Showdown of the Skulls, which is just like draw 4 and then pump your creatures. We got Wedding Announcement, draw some cards, make some tokens. How does Cabaretti Ascendancy compete with that? I guess we're going to have to wait and see. It's nice that it's multicolored, I guess, because it doesn't get hit by Vanishing Verse. So even in the best possible deck for this card, I'm not sure that it's worth it. The same is mostly true of Commander. Like in Commander, there's certainly Naya creature decks, Gishath or Etla Pellini or Mael of the Anima, that are probably going to be about 50% to draw with this. You got 50 creatures and planeswalkers in your deck. The rest of it's lands and ramp spells, maybe a couple of Wraths or whatever. Is that going to be worth it? And I'm still not sure, because there's so many other options. Like, look at all these random uncommons: Colossal Might, Tramp of Ferocity, Garruk's Uprising, Elemental Bond, Guardian Project, I guess, a rare, but still, these are all just probably more consistent sources of card draw for the same exact decks that would be able to play Cabaretti Ascendancy. So I feel like even in the decks that would want this, it might just be beaten out by random old uncommon. So I kind of feel like Cabaretti Ascendancy, not that it's bad, like no matter what, worst case you scry one, best case you draw a card. In the right deck, you're drawing about half the time. That's fine, that's not horrible. But I think that in Standard and also in Commander, there's probably just more consistent options that do the same exact thing. So I kind of feel a little disappointed in this Ascendancy, especially when you consider that a lot of the cards that are arguably just better than it, like Colossal Majesty or Elemental Bond, are monocolored. They're monocolored uncommons. This is a 3-color rare, and it might not even be as good as those random uncommons. So I feel like Wizards could have juiced this one a little bit more. As it is, like I said, drawing an extra card half the time, scrying the other half is not bad, but you can probably do the same thing more effectively with another card. We also got Aven Heartstabber, a 2-mana 1/1 Bird Assassin with flying, and it says as long as there are 5 or more mana values among cards in your graveyard, it gets +2/+2 in Death Touch. So it'll be a 3/3 flying Death Touch, and when it dies, mill 2 cards and then draw a card. So Aven Heartstabber, showing off this new mechanic that I gotta say, I just don't think is going to work in Constructed. The getting 5 different mana values in your graveyard, that seems like a lot of work. So Aven Heartstabber, kind of like a Baleful Strix at home, like a very watered down Baleful Strix. The card draw comes when it dies. It doesn't have Death Touch until you meet a pretty high bar of getting 5 different mana values in your graveyard. If you do all those things and it ends up dying, and you block and trade with something, and you mill and you draw a card, then it's actually pretty effective. But you got to do a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff has to go right for it to be good. I guess just drawing when it dies is kind of nice, although even that's risky because it could get exiled. I do like that we have the pieces for this deck. Like, I've been wanting the Willow Geist Old Stick Fingers deck to work in Standard for a while, and I think this is another nice piece of that puzzle. Some sort of Sultai Graveyard Self-Mill deck. On the other hand, look at the cards currently on screen. Willow Geist, Old Stick Fingers, Slogurk, Even Death, Wrenn and 7. You're going to have to get a copy of each of those cards into the graveyard, or I guess 4 out of those 5 along with a land, to actually be able to turn on your Aven Heartstabber to get those 5 different mana values. And then you also got to dodge Go Blank. You also got to dodge Graveyard Trespass. You also got to dodge all that stuff. Farewell. There's so much incidental graveyard hate in Standard that I actually feel like this is a card that has potential to be sweet, but because of the removal in the format and because of the graveyard hate in the format, getting 5 different mana values in your graveyard and keeping them there is just way too high of a bar to get over. Like, we saw Delirium be pretty challenging to turn on in Standard for a lot of decks, and that was 4 different card types, which is, I think, way easier than 5 different mana values. So I kind of feel like this is just not a mechanic that's going to work in Constructed formats, and doubly so in Standard, where it feels like every deck that you play against has some sort of accidental graveyard hate. So you're going to do all this work to fill your graveyard, and then your opponent's going to cast a Go Blank and undo all of it, and you're back to playing a 1/1 for 2, or your opponent's just going to Spike Field Hazard. So I'm actually like, this set's so weird. I'm super disappointed in this mechanic. It's probably great for Limited. It's probably perfect there. For Constructed, I think it's just going to be too high of a bar to get over. Hopefully I'm wrong, though. This set's very strange, though, because I think, like, some of the mechanics in this set are, like, awesome and busted. Like, Casualty, I think, is absurd. Connive, I think, is absurd. And then you got this mechanic, which I read it, I'm just like, how, like, what a big difference in power level between the good mechanics in the set for constructed and the lower power mechanics in the set. Like, this seems like a really, really bad constructed mechanic when those other mechanics are, like, all-star, amazing, insane. So we'll have to wait and see. Maybe I'm making it sound harder than it is. Maybe it's going to be way easier than I think to get 5 different mana values in the graveyard. If you can do that pretty quickly and dodge the graveyard hate, this is a good card. If it's a 3/3 Death Toucher that draws when it dies and mills when it dies, that's a great card. I don't know. I'm just not seeing that as something you can reasonably pull off in our current standard format with so much graveyard hate running around, though. Next up, we have Unleash the Inferno, a new Jund removal spell. So 4 mana Jund colors instant. Deals 7 damage to target creature or planeswalker, and then when it deals excess damage this way, destroy target artifact or enchantment an opponent controls with mana value less than or equal to the amount of excess damage. So essentially you hit a 4 toughness creature, and then you can blow up an artifact or enchantment, mana value 3 or less. And I actually think this card could be pretty good. So on level 1, it kills almost everything in format. The only card that I could find that is popular in standard that this doesn't kill is Hullbreaker Horror. Otherwise, 7 damage is pretty much a murder. Sure, it costs 4 mana, but you're getting this upside. The upside of this card is you can kill a Wandering Emperor, a Kaido, or a Edaline, whatever threat you need, and potentially be blowing up an artifact or enchantment, and many decks in standard have at least some artifacts or enchantments that are worth blowing up. You got Wedding Announcements, Azeka's Chariots, Reckoner Bankbuster, Fable the Mirror Breaker, Oni Called Anvil. When you are sniping a creature and also sniping one of these cards, then this is a really, really solid, almost modern Jund style 2-for-1 effect. So I think that Unleash the Inferno definitely has a lot of potential, being a expensive but still functional murder that can potentially be a 2-for-1 and kill some really powerful, important artifacts and enchantments. I think means it's a pretty good standard card. As far as Commander is concerned, I'm going to try it in Commander. I'm not sure that it's going to be good enough. In Commander, creatures can be bigger, so you're not going to be able to kill everything, and there's pretty efficient removal. Beast Within, Assassin's Trophy, Putrefy, Terminate, these are all cards that you can play in your Jund deck. Is Unleash the Inferno going to be worth it there? I think the good news is there are a lot of artifacts and enchantments. Like, worst case, everyone plays Mana Rocks, so you should be able to kill something and blow up a Mana Rock, although, I don't know, blowing up Mana Rocks is actually kind of risky in Commander, because it's not all that powerful usually, but it does anger your opponent and make them want to attack you. So I often don't like just blowing up Mana Rocks unless someone's getting like super far ahead with turn 1 Soul Ring or something. Like, the amount of heat that you draw is worth more than the amount of mana that you take off the table. So I'm planning on trying it though, because I do like the 2-for-1 potential. So Unleash the Inferno, we're gonna have to wait and see. We don't really have many Jund decks in standard. We got a lot of really solid options, removal options especially, coming in New Capenna. If there's a Jund deck in standard, I think this could be a part of it, because like I said, there's a lot of good artifacts and enchantments running around. The other trick I didn't mention is this just says artifact or enchantment, so this can blow up enchantment creatures, it can blow up equipment creatures, so there are ways that this can actually just snipe straight up 2 creatures in standard, which is pretty sweet. We also got Rabble Rousing, which might be the new best of the hideaway cycle. 5 mana enchantment. Whenever you attack with 1 or more creatures, create that many 1/1 green and white citizen creature tokens. Then if you control 10 or more creatures, you can play the exiled card without paying its mana cost. This card is pretty absurd. So it kind of calls back to Windbrisk Heights, one of the original hideaway cards. Wants you to attack with a bunch of creatures and you get to play the thing for free. But Rabble Rousing does so much more on its own. It's essentially like Najeela's ability, a Basri cat ticking down, launch the fleet for a bunch of mana. Like, being able to attack with your creatures and get a 1/1 token for each creature you attack with is a ridiculous amount of value in a token deck, in a go wide deck. Notice, it doesn't say non-token creature. It just says attack with a creature, which not only means you can play this in a token deck, but means it snowballs with itself. You play this and attack with a few creatures. They're each going to make a token. The next turn, you can attack with those creatures and the tokens. They're all going to make more tokens. So this is quickly going to get up to 10 creatures and allow you to win the game. The other thing I love about this card is the tokens are not tapped in attacking. One thing that drives me crazy with cards like Basri Cat or Goblin Rabble Master, a lot of these effects is they make the token tapped in attacking. The problem is it's a 1/1. So a lot of the time that token just chump attacks into one of your opponent's blockers and doesn't do anything. Not attacking is actually a huge upside because it lets you store up those tokens to get up to 10 creatures. So I think this card is actually really powerful. 5 mana is a lot, but still, just look at a standard deck. Hopeful Initiate, Luminarch Aspirant, Elite Spellbinder, Legion Angel. You make that curve, you follow it up with Rabble Rousing, you attack with everything, you make 4 tokens, and then the next turn, assuming you didn't lose anything in combat, you attack with everything, you make 8 more tokens, then you easily turn on Rabble Rousing, you get to cast something for free. Like, that is kind of insane, and that's just in White Weenie. That's not even a token deck. Like, if you're playing this in a deck that's built to put tokens on the battlefield, things that put multiple bodies on the battlefield, it gets even better. Also has some synergies in standard. Kaya Geist Hunter lets you double up your tokens. Go back to that same line. You're getting 8 tokens with the first attack if you add Kaya into the mix. Also really sweet with Ishin. 2 Heavens is one, because it's an attack trigger. So you're doubling it up with Ishin, getting twice as many tokens. Maybe we can see Citizens and Samurai join together and make an actual deck. Definitely gonna play it with Ishin though. I'm looking forward to revisiting Ishin now that we're getting some more of these cards. Ishin's been really sweet in older formats, but we might have enough to make it work in standard now. Also just works really well with stuff that cares about going wide. Like, this is one of the easiest ways to turn on Jetmir and get to that last mode, and then all of your tokens are, oh my god, like so devastating. If they're all getting +3/+0, double strike, trample, invigilance, you probably just win the game. It's one of the easiest ways to get 15 creatures for Halo Fountain. We still got Strixhaven Stadium in standard that just wants you to hit your opponent with as many little creatures as possible. So I actually kind of just love this card. We'll have to see if 5 mana is too much, but it does kind of do something right away, assuming you have a board, because you're going to get that first batch of tokens right away. So I think Rabble Rousing is really sweet, and it also seems like in All-Star and any token commander deck in its colors, Reese, Prava, Amara, Thales, whatever token deck you're making, like, this just makes so many more tokens. And in Commander, you're also going to have all the support cards, Anointed Procession, Doubling Season, Parallel Lives, to make even more tokens. So Rabble Rousing, I think this card's legit, and also worth mentioning the hideaway part. So far, we've just been talking about it as a fair card. You are going to get a free card out of this, and that could mean hiding away a Craterhoof Behemoth, a Coat of Arms, maybe a Cathar's Crusade, where you're able to pump all your tokens and just one-shot people really, really quickly. But even if you're just casting another random thing from your deck, that's fine. This is one of the only hideaway cards from New Capenna that is kind of a good card without hideaway. Like, you don't even need the hideaway to make this good. It's just a really powerful snowball-y effect. So I think this card is, like, legit good. I'm excited for it. I'm going to try it in standard. I think it could be really good in the right deck in standard. 5 mana scares me a little bit, but still, the power level and snowball potential of this card is really high. But still, the power level and snowball potential of this card is really high. Next up, we got another graveyardy card in Sanguine Spy, a 3-mana 2/3 vampire rogue with menace and lifelink. And it says, pay 1, sack another creature. Look at the top card of your library, you can put it in your graveyard. So essentially, surveil, but not keyworded. And then at the beginning of your end step, if there are 5 or more different mana values among cards in your graveyard, you may pay 2 life. If you do, draw a card. So, considering that, I think it's going to be really tough to get 5 different mana values and keep them in your graveyard. Is this card good enough, assuming you're not able to draw cards with it? And the answer is, it's okay. Like, a 3-mana 2/3 menace lifelink, that's not a horrible creature. It is a vampire, so there's some creature type synergies. I guess rogues also have some synergies. And then the sack to surveil mode, if you're trying to fill your graveyard, like, isn't horrible, especially if you got stuff that you want to sack. I do wonder if Skullport Merchant is mostly better. Like, 1 more mana, but you get to actually just draw a card rather than filling your graveyard. I guess it depends on if your goal is to try to fill your graveyard or if your goal is to generate card advantage. I lean towards Skullport probably being more powerful, even though as a creature, it's not as good. You don't get the lifelink, you don't get the menace, you don't get any of that stuff. There is plenty of sacrifice fodder in the format, so maybe we'll see this show up in some number in a sacrifice deck. But really, this is another card that, I don't know, I just can't really get hyped for the 5 different mana values in the graveyard thing. I'm hoping I'm wrong, and it's way easier to do than I think. But at this point, I'm still expecting it just to be more of a limited thing than a constructed thing. On the other hand, oh my goodness, we got one of the sweetest new commanders, new legends, new Naya cards in a while. Jinnie Fey Jetmir second. So 3 mana, one of those crazy weird hybrid cards. Can be anything from triple green to Gruul to Selesnya to full-on Naya. So it's a 3 mana 3/3 elf druid. It's a legend, and it says if you would create 1 or more tokens, you may instead create that many 2/2 green cat creature tokens with haste, or that many 1/3 green dog creature tokens with vigilance. So this is kind of like a weird divine visitation on a body that can be your commander, which is a huge deal. Divine Visitation, of course, upgrades into 4/4 angels. Jinnie Fey, not quite going that far. It's upgrading your 1/1s into 2/2s, your 1/1s into 3/1s or whatever. whatever. The big difference here, though, and this is really important to point out, Divine Visitation says creature tokens. Jenny just says any token. So this means all of a sudden your treasures can become dogs or cats. Your blood tokens, your clue tokens, your Nico Eris shard tokens can turn into dogs or cats, which is huge. That is such a big deal because, as we've seen in Standard, like, blood tokens are priced really, really cheap. Like, it is so easy to make blood tokens. Treasures are all over the place. Clues aren't that bad. Nico Eris can make a ton of shard tokens. It's much, much cheaper to make blood tokens or other similar effects than to make actual creature tokens. So because this works with non-creature tokens, I'm actually really hyped about what this can do. Like, turning all your blood and food into actual creatures is super, super sweet. In Commander, obviously kind of insane with Dockside. Dockside makes so many treasure tokens. Being able to turn them all into like hasty cats seems like a good way to close out the game. In Standard, there's also some synergies. Like, you can use it with creature tokens as well. So imagine sacking something big to 10 the pass, and instead of making a bunch of 1/1s, making a bunch of hasty 2/2s or a bunch of 3/1 dog tokens. So it works well in a normal token deck. Also super cute with Decay Zombies. Decay Zombies, another type of token that's really cheap to make because Decay is pretty bad. Like, you can't really use them, you can't block with them, you can only attack with them once. On the other hand, if you got Jinnie out, all of a sudden your Jadar is making a real creature. It's making a 2/2 hasty cat or a 3/1 dog, and you're not gonna have a Decay creature. So Jadar's just gonna keep triggering every turn, or all of a sudden your Ghoul Colors Harvest is just gonna make a ton of real creatures. Your Tainted Adversary gets so much better. So that's another direction to go, using this with Decay creatures. In Commander, I think this is gonna show up in the 99 of a bunch of different decks. Like, if you were a token deck in Jinnie Phase colors, I think you just play it. Also really sweet with Rin-Sari. Like, it seems built for Rin-Sari, but it's also just a sweet commander, like, to build around. It's so easy to make treasures and all these weird non-creature tokens, and Jinnie makes them so good. And there's even infinite combo potential. Easiest infinite combo. Requiem Angel, probably the easiest. Requiem Angel, when a non-spirit creature dies, you make a 1/1 spirit. Jinnie can turn that spirit into a cat or a dog. So then, if you have a sack outlet, like let's say Ashnod's Altar, you can sack the cat or the dog, and that's going to trigger Requiem Angel again, and it's going to make a cat or a dog instead of a spirit, so you can sack it again and again and again. So this is going to give you infinite ETB triggers, infinite leaves the battlefield triggers. If your sack outlet's Ashnod's Altar, infinite mana, and we even got Wily Taunter, which is kind of a great finisher for this. Normally with these infinite death loops, you want to be in black for like Blood Artist effects, but Wily Taunter kind of can do the same thing. When another creature enters the battlefield, it just pings each opponent for 1. So this can be the finisher for that combo. So I think Jinnie, this card's super sweet. One of the coolest cards we've seen from the set. I think it's going to be super fun to build around in Standard. It can do really powerful things, upgrading these kind of useless but cheap tokens into real creatures. And in Commander, it seems like a sweet 99 card, a combo piece, and an awesome commander leading from the command zone. In the world of lower rarity cards, we had a few worth shouting out, starting with this 3-drop cycle that generates card advantage. Brazen Upstart, Core Appraiser are the two that came up today. Brazen Upstart, decent stats, 3 mana, 4/3 and Naya with Vigilance. When it dies, you'll get the top 5 cards of your library. You can snag a creature to put in your hand. Corpse Appraiser, 3 mana, 3/3 and Grixis. When it enters the battlefield, you can snipe a creature from a graveyard. If you do, you anticipate. Look at the top 3 cards of your library, put 1 into your hand. Both of these seem pretty playable to me. Good triggers, either on death or ETB with reasonable stats. So worth keeping in mind. I don't think they're busted, but they seem close enough to be constructed playable. We also got Dusk Abomination, 7 mana, 5/4 horror. Is an additional cost to cast it. You gotta sack a creature, discard a card, or pay for life. And when it enters the battlefield, each opponent sacks a creature, discards a card, and loses 4 life. So this is a card that I don't think you want to cast, but if you're playing some sort of reanimation style deck, it is a pretty sweet ETB trigger. Like, each opponent sacking, discarding, and losing 4, that's a lot of value. So I don't know, is it better than a Hullbreaker Horror, Jin-Gitaxias, or Coben Standard? Probably not, but I think it's worth keeping in mind, if not for Standard, at least for Reanimator decks in Commander, where it seems like a nice filler style card, and we do have a lot of reanimation in Standard, so I don't know, maybe it works there too. We also got Wily Taunter, mentioned it briefly a couple minutes ago. Interesting payoff for infinite ETB triggers in red, which is something we haven't really had before, so probably some sweet combo potential. Gravecrawler, Phyrexian Altar, Sapphiaric's Daughter with Expert Rescuer, any combo like that. This is going to be a really nice payoff that doesn't require you to be in black for a Blood Artist effect. We also got Sleep with the Fishes, which isn't a playable card, but it deserves a shout out just for the flavor. I mean, that is exactly what New Capenna in this gangster theme set should be about, so great reference there, even if the card is kinda not that good. Finally today, a bunch of other random commons and uncommons. Don't have time to talk about them all, but if you want to see them, you can check them out over at MTGpreviews.com. Anyway, that brings us to the end of our daily Streets of New Capenna spoilers for today, so did we get some good cards today? What awesome stuff in this set. So let me know what you think. Is the get 5 mana values in your graveyard stuff better than I think? What about that crazy black angel, the new Naya token cat dog legend, all that sweet stuff? Let me know what you think about it in the comments. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I'll be back tomorrow with more daily Streets of New Capenna spoilers. So until then, have a spectacular day, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.